Hi everyone, so I haven't done a video for a while, that's an understatement. I still have plenty of ideas for Loki videos and non-Loki videos, believe it or not. And I'm starting with this review of Thor, Love and Thunder. So it's a very divisive movie, to say the least. I see a lot of people who loved it, but also a lot of people who just thought it was just alright. And some who say it was actually the worst Thor movie ever made, which usually triggers a debate over whether it's worse than The Dark World, because The Dark World is often considered to be the worst Thor movie, if not the worst MCU movie by many people. Not by me, I have to say. So basically the question I'm asking today is it fair to say that Love and Thunder is the worst Thor movie? So I'll be mostly comparing it with Thor Ragnarok because it's from the same director, and with The Dark World because it's the one that's often seen by most people as the worst. I'm gonna be honest and say it right away, I was extremely disappointed by Thor, Love and Thunder. And usually I'm not really fond of posting videos about stuff I did not like. I know it's the best way to have views on YouTube. That's clearly the right strategy if you want to make a lot of views. You need to criticize stuff and say everything's terrible, but I don't like doing that. But at the same time, it is also the first Thor movie to be released in cinemas since I started the channel, and therefore I thought it made sense to talk about it, and also I have a lot of thoughts. I expected to enjoy Love and Thunder, to be honest. I was not among the Loki fans who hated Thor Ragnarok. And of course I knew that Loki was not going to be in Thor Love and Thunder, but I had made my peace with that. I did not expect him to show up, in spite of some of the rumors, but we saw what those rumors were worth with Multiverse of Madness. Everyone was saying that Sylvie, Loki, Mobius, everyone would be in the movie and they were not, so I really did not expect Loki to turn up. And I thought really I could just have a good time even if Loki was not there. But in the end, I have to say, I did not really enjoy it. And my problem with this film was kind of the same that I had with Multiverse of Madness, really. I did not review Multiverse of Madness on my channel simply because I was quite disappointed. I expected a lot from that movie, more than I expected from Love and Thunder. And I didn't really know what to say after seeing it, apart from it was a bit disappointing. And basically my impressions of both films were quite similar. I thought there were some really good ideas, both narratively and visually. Sometimes it was very creative, but in the end it felt like they had not really taken the time to write a good story. In both films, the story felt a bit superficial to me. In particular, I thought there was very little character development. The narrative felt very scattered, and in the end there was a lot of potential but very little actual substance there. At least in the case of Multiverse of Madness, there was the excuse of having to navigate the multiverse, which multiplies the number of characters. It kind of lowers the stakes because these characters now exist in, various versions. And it makes it an easy trap to fall into that characters will lack development, of course, because there are too many of them. But Thor, Love and Thunder did not really have this excuse, and yet it felt even more superficial than Multiverse of Madness to me. I felt the villain could have been great, but his potential was wasted. I felt the themes could be powerful and deep, but they were never really explored fully. I felt the story was a bit lazy. I don't really like to use that word because it's a bit judgmental, but it felt a bit unfinished, and the film somehow felt like it was both too long and not long enough, if that makes any sense. It felt too long for what little it had to say, but it did not feel long enough because there was not enough development where it was needed. And I also felt the humor was not nearly as efficient as it was in Ragnarok. I laughed a little, but nowhere close to the experience that I had when I watched Thor Ragnarok for the first time. So that was the spoiler-free review, but now, spoiler alert, from this point on there will be spoilers, so don't go any further if you haven't seen the film and you don't want to be spoiled. So to forget about Multiverse of Madness and focus really more on Thor, Love and Thunder, I really thought there were some very interesting themes there. Gore the God Butcher's story was very compelling in theory, this idea of sacrificing everything you have, including your child, for a god, only to find out that the gods don't give a shit about you, and then deciding that you're going to get revenge and set out to kill them all. There's really potential for something very deep there about the loss of faith. It was very interesting, and Christian Bale is an amazing actor, so there was a lot of potential. But for me, it kind of felt disconnected from the rest of the plot, to be honest, even though I rather like the resolution at the end, with Gore choosing to bring his daughter back and the daughter being adopted by Thor. It was a creative solution. It worked well, I thought, narratively, but it also felt kind of too emotional suddenly for a film that was way too comedic and light-hearted. Now, I know that many people said that about Ragnarok, so you're gonna say, Charlotte, you loved Ragnarok and now you're complaining about comedy ruining the emotional moments in Love and Thunder. How does that make sense? But I don't really agree that there were no emotional moments in Ragnarok. It's just my opinion. I think Taika rightfully understood that the real emotional moments were not the big events like, you know, the destruction of Asgard. Because really, I mean, even as a Loki fan, I can't say I've ever really cared about Asgard. They never really managed to make the place very real in a way. So for me, like, the destruction of Asgard itself, the fact that it was undercut by jokes, I did not really mind. For me, the heart of the film was in the relationships, and I think that was something that Taika really understood in that film, that it was about more intimate moments. For example, the last conversation between Odin and his sons, or the various conversations between Thor and Loki, especially the one in the lift. I mean, for me, those are the scenes that are really the beating heart of Ragnarok, and some of them are quite moving, even though yes, it's always quite light. But they do touch some kind of truth of the characters. And also, emotion doesn't have to be always like a tearjerker. It can also be something a bit more bittersweet, and that's really what you see in those scenes between Thor and Loki. There's always a bit of comedy there, but it's sometimes like tapping into very real pain as well. So for me, it worked well in Ragnarok, and I don't think it worked that well in Love and Thunder. In Love and Thunder, there were a lot of things that felt quite pointless, to be honest. With sometimes some really crazy visual landscapes that were creative. Sometimes they looked good, sometimes not so much in my opinion, but that's really a matter of taste. But really, like the whole sequence, for example, with Zeus and all the gods, it felt very self-indulgent. It didn't really bring much, I thought, apart from another example that the gods are mostly idiots, but we did know that already from the prologue. It had been established, so it didn't feel very useful, this kind of stop in another place. It's a bit like Sakaar in Ragnarok, really, the equivalent, I guess, in terms of the structure of the plot. They visit another place that is quite weird, and that gives the director an excuse to create like very lavish visual landscapes with lots of costumes and lots of characters. But in Ragnarok, Sakaar was useful. Sakaar could seem like a subplot that was just an excuse to have some fun creating a weird alien planet, but there were lots of things that happened on Sakaar that were interesting. First they introduced Valkyrie, they reintroduced the Hulk, and they also explored the relationship between Loki and Thor, thanks to the fact that they took them away from the main action and they had to kind of figure out what to do. Whereas in Love and Thunder, really this sequence with the gods, I mean, they gained a weapon. There were a few jokes about how Thor and Zeus actually have the same attributes in a way, because they are both gods of thunder. So yeah, why not? That was funny, but it all felt a bit pointless, really. So I've already kind of touched upon this, but I was quite disappointed with Gore. I did not think it was used very well. First, as I've said, it felt a bit disconnected from the rest of the plot, especially in terms of the tone. And also there's the fact that, well, he's never really shown killing any gods. He's called a god butcher. It's supposed to be very fearsome and it's very ominous. We see him kill that big creature and then pretty much nothing else. We don't really see how powerful he is. His powers are barely described. We don't even really know what he does exactly when he attacks the children, like he uses shadow monsters and stuff. It's all very vague. And that attack on the children, to be honest, felt very lazy. It felt like they had no idea how to advance the plot. How could we make Thor chase after Gore? What can we do? Oh, he'll just kidnap some children, you know, it's always emotional, and I did not find that very convincing. You know, especially in contrast with Hela. In Ragnarok, Hela's introduction is very efficient. It was made very clear right away what kind of powers she had, how powerful she really was, what she wanted, and also why this plot was really relevant to Thor and Loki as well. she's their sister. She has a grudge. She has a grudge specifically against the Asgardian royal family. She wants to take back Asgard, which is their home, so it was obvious what the stakes were. Actually, it is a principle in the theory of writing that the hero and the villain are kind of supposed to be two sides of the same coin, so you need the villain to have a specific relationship to the hero to justify that villain being the antagonist. For example, Loki and Thor are clearly two sides of the same coin, and the same can be said about Hela and Thor in a way, so in these cases it's quite obvious, and that's why it works. In the Dark World and in Love and Thunder, I wouldn't say it works that well. It's not very clear why Thor is the one who has to fight Gorr, basically. The antagonist is supposed to be the one that is most qualified to hurt the hero. So, alright, Gorr is very qualified to hurt Thor because he's got this weapon that allows him to kill gods, but the problem is more, why is Thor the only one who cares among all the gods? Okay, we're told the gods are a bit stupid and they don't understand the gravity of the situation, but there should be at least one or two minor gods who care. I don't know, it doesn't really seem to make much sense. Another thing I was very disappointed in was the lack of development for a number of secondary characters, in particular Jane and Valkyrie. Jane, who was supposed to be one of the central characters, in fact, and well, she was given cooler things to do than in the other Thor films for sure, which wasn't very hard, to be honest, and Natalie Portman also seemed to enjoy herself more, which also wasn't very hard, but I felt like Jane should really have been a much more important character. We did not even see her first transformation into Mighty Thor, so I know it was for the sake of surprise, but still it was a bit anticlimactic, and her storyline was pretty predictable as well, and now she's dead, so okay. I thought maybe they would be setting her up to become a more interesting and more important character in the future, but apparently not. And Valkyrie, who was a great character in Ragnarok, was basically only there to crack a few jokes and that's it, so it was not very interesting what they gave her, and it was even more disappointing as she was supposed to be king now, so she got a promotion, she became king of Asgard, and in the end there is very little substance to her arc, unlike in Ragnarok when she actually had an arc. And worst of all probably was Sif. She was brought back after being completely ignored in Ragnarok, but only for one scene or two maybe in which she basically lost an arm, so it feels a bit like a waste. They brought her back, they gave her nothing to do, and now she's lost an arm. Honestly, I thought that the scene they gave her in the Loki series, which was like a little cameo, was more interesting than what she was given to do in Thor Love and Thunder. And yes, I know some people would say the same thing about Ragnarok and the way the film treated the Warriors 3, but I can't say I've ever really cared much about the Warriors 3, to be honest, so I'm gonna be a bit biased here and say that if it's about characters I find boring, then it's okay.
That's the rules that I've just made up.
Another big difference, in my opinion, between Ragnarok and Love and Thunder is that I don't remember Ragnarok repeating the same jokes over and over. The comedy was a lot more varied, and in my opinion it was also a lot funnier. I don't know if I can credit the writing, as they claim that about 80% of the lines were improvised, but at least they kept the good stuff. Whereas with this movie, apparently more than 2 hours of footage were cut. I don't know what that means. Does it mean that they cut the good stuff and they left the bad stuff in? Or is the stuff that they cut even worse than what they kept? I don't know, but it would be interesting to see. Some people got annoyed in Ragnarok by the sheer number of jokes. There were lots of jokes and they felt it undercut some more serious aspects of the film. But I don't remember the jokes being repeated over and over again, and honestly some of those lines were just really, really funny. I mean, things like this.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
Or that.
Friend from work!
Or that.
Hey, let's do get help.
What?
Get help.
No.
Come on, you love it.
I hate it.
It's great, it works every time.
It's humiliating.
Do you have a better plan?
No.
We're doing it.
Whereas in Thor Love and Thunder, well, of course I've seen it once only. I haven't been able to see it a second time since I saw it in the theatre, but But I remember you had the screaming goat joke, which was pretty funny. Honestly, the first time I thought it was funny to use the meme of the screaming goat that sounds like a human screaming. It was funny the first time, maybe the second time, but after 3, 4, 5 times you're like, just move on maybe to another joke. Then you had the constant running gag of Stormbreaker is jealous of Mjolnir. And that was, well, mildly funny to begin with, but again, repeating it several times, it kind of became a bit boring. And even worse than this, Love and Thunder actually recycled some jokes directly from Ragnarok. The theater scene in Ragnarok, it was hilarious. They kind of lifted that from Ragnarok, they reused the same recipe, so it was hilarious the first time, really. The second time, yeah, it was mildly funny, but I don't know, it felt a bit lazy to just use that recipe again. It reminded me strongly also of that Ragnarok 4D video on YouTube where the actors surprised the audience of the premiere. They came dressed as their characters but with very, very cheap and terrible costumes, and they recreated scenes from the film in a very, very bad way. So it's very funny, this one. But yeah, I did not think it worked as well in the second film, and also it lacked the context that made the first one so funny. It was not just that the play was silly, it was also that it was a silly play that Loki himself had directed to glorify himself and pretend he was watching it dressed as Odin. So it was the whole context that was really funny, and this time it was an Asgardian theme park. Okay, that's kind of funny as well, but not as clever and funny as the other one, I thought. And when it comes to the humor, it's hard to say where it went wrong. I was not behind the scenes, obviously, I don't know. It kind of feels, to be honest, like Taika Waititi and Chris Hemsworth, and maybe also Tessa Thompson and others, I don't know, but it seems like they had their fun, but maybe they forgot that what made them laugh was not the same as what would make people laugh, and maybe there was no one to tell them that, I don't know. I know that Taika himself recently declared that he thought directors ought to be controlled, that they should not be left completely free to do what they wanted, because then they get lost in their own imagination, I guess. So he's aware of this potential problem, and yet in my opinion that might have been the problem with this film. You can always see that he's got this creativity, even though there's a bit of recycling, but he has these crazy ideas. But this time I thought, unlike Ragnarok, which felt very tight and very efficient, this one was... it felt scattered and messy, and it lacked direction, really. And I wonder, after all, if Loki's absence is not one of the problems. I feel like, well, you know, maybe Tom Hiddleston's influence, or maybe the fact that Loki is a bit of a sophisticated character, so his humor is a bit different. Maybe that also was lacking from the film after all. I know a lot of people claim that Tom Hiddleston was sidelined during the making of Ragnarok, that he was not given much influence over the process, but I don't know if it's true. Anyway, if there was a lot of improvisation, it means that the film relied a lot on his creativity and his chemistry with Chris Hemsworth, which was great. So, in a way, I think, after all, that Loki was really missing from that film. And I understand why he's not in the film, it makes sense, but still, they did not really find another character or another factor that could recreate this kind of dynamic and make the film better. Is it worse than The Dark World? The Dark World, as I've already said, is often said to be the worst Thor movie, or even the worst MCU movie. And to be honest, I'm not among those who try to defend it and claim that it's actually good. If I'm really honest, I really struggled not to turn it off after Loki died. I think it suffers from the same kind of problem as Love and Thunder regarding the main villain, the fact that his quest doesn't seem sufficiently related to Thor as a character. It seems like they kind of needed a pretext to introduce the reality stone through the ether, and that this was the most important concern, rather than trying to create a villain that was really compelling. I do think The Dark World would have been a much better film if they had focused on what really worked in the film, and that was, in my opinion at least, the Asgardian royal family drama, especially the Thor-Loki relationship. So that's why I'm not sure I would say that The Dark World is worse than Love and Thunder, because it's not so much a bad movie as it is a very uneven movie. The main problem with The Dark World is that it feels like several movies packed into one, basically. All the scenes related to the Ether, Malekith, the Dark Elves, and I would say even the plot on Earth, they're kind of boring and messy and directionless. Whereas all the scenes that focus on the family drama in Asgard are absolute gold. In the first Thor, Loki is too tragic and the god of mischief element is not really present enough. He causes a lot of chaos, but it seems that it's motivated far more by very, very deep suffering and resentment than by playfulness. So in the first movie, most of the comedy comes from Thor on Earth. And honestly, I wouldn't say it's the best part of the movie. It's not where the movie shines the most. These comedic scenes, they're funny enough, but they're not amazing. Thor Ragnarok, on the other hand, had the opposite problem, which was that it was a comedy with a few hints of tragedy, and I know many Loki fans dislike it for turning Loki into a joke. Personally, I don't really mind because I think Loki was always meant to be a bit ridiculous, and sometimes they emphasize this side more, and that's fine. Sometimes they emphasize the tragic side more, and that's fine as well. And in my opinion, the one film that struck the perfect balance between tragic Loki and comedic Loki is The Dark World. You really see Loki hit rock bottom when it comes to the tragic side of his character. First there's this very emotional confrontation with Odin, who tells him horrible things, and then of course his confrontation with Frigga, followed by her death, this amazing scene in the dungeons where Thor visits him and Loki reveals the true state of his mental health. And then there's also this really, really powerful confrontation on the spaceship, which is one of my favorite scenes in any Thor movie, really. But you also see Loki's chaotic nature and his mischievous side. And in my opinion, these scenes are really funny. The whole escape from Asgard sequence is absolute gold. The way that he morphs into various characters, that's funny enough, but then the spaceship in particular, I really love this scene. Many people praised Get Help in Ragnarok as, you know, a scene that really showcased the kind of brotherly relationship between Thor and Loki, because it feels really real and relatable. But I think The Dark World deserves more credit, because I would argue that they actually introduced that relationship dynamic. And I think that kind of scene was missing from the first Thor movie, a scene that would really make them feel like brothers to us, you know, the fact that they cut the scene just before the coronation scene, which was maybe the only one where you had a bit of banter like this, and the only scene that's left to characterize the relationship before the big crisis is when they were children, and it's a kind of pompous scene with Odin telling them the story of the frost giants and how they would have to protect the peace, so it doesn't feel like a very everyday scene of brotherly bonding, you know. So The Dark World kind of introduced that dynamic for the first time, and then Get Help in Ragnarok kind of reused that dynamic. I think it built on it, so The Dark World deserves credit there. And it may not be a great film, but at least the parts that are good are really good. That's what I would say about The Dark World. Even the scenes without Loki, there are a few that are quite funny. There's the scene in which Thor puts Mjolnir on the rack that I think was improvised as well, and this is really funny. There's Selvig's reaction to the news that Loki's dead. I also find that one very funny. Or even Darcy's silly Mew Mew scene. I mean, it is silly, but it is quite funny, and it's not worse than most of the humor in Thor Love and Thunder, I think. So at least, I would say some things are good in The Dark World. Some scenes are really amazing. Some of the best scenes of any Thor movie, in my opinion. Whereas in Love and Thunder, I can't really think of a single scene that will stick in my mind that I will remember and I will want to rewatch again and again. I enjoyed the scene between him and Jane when they were discussing their relationship on the spaceship. And I enjoyed, for example, the children being gifted with the power of Thor. I thought that was funny, and visually it was pretty cool as well. But I can't really remember one scene that stuck in my head. So yeah, overall I was really disappointed in Thor Love and Thunder, and I have to say I've been disappointed in most of the films of Phase 4, apart from Shang-Chi, which I thought was really cool, and Spider-Man No Way Home, which I thought was a great success. But apart from these two, I found most of the movies either a bit meh or not very good. Actually, I'm sorry to say that I think Thor Love and Thunder is the one I enjoyed the least, if I'm honest. Okay, so this was a bit of a lazy video in a way. It's not analysis, it's just me giving my opinion. But I have something on the multiverse and variants based on everything we've seen so far. So What If, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Spider-Man No Way Home, and of course Loki. I also have more stuff about Loki in particular, something about his shape-shifting magic, and probably also some other Tom Hiddleston related things if I can find the time. So maybe something on The Night Manager, for example. So stay tuned, and I see you soon. Bye bye!